Oh, what day is it? It is day 83. Right, we're going to talk about Project Zomboid and why it is the worst and also the best sandbox zombie survival game on the market at the moment. This is an installment of a 100 days playthrough, and the gameplay will be on in the background for those consistent and loyal viewers, all 12 of you. But I wanted to make a video essay for a while, and I thought now would be the best time. So after playing a few hundred hours of the game and surviving 85 days as of current, I wanted to share my opinion on the game and what's wrong with it. And if anyone is interested to drop what they think below, whether they agree or disagree, I'd love to see your views. So where do I begin? The base game and how it does enough, sometimes too much in some areas and not enough in others. The base game provides a really realistic feel, but this comes as a double-edged sword, as sometimes when you play this game, it feels a bit mundane, repetitive and with no real end goal, which I understand is the point of a sandbox, leaving it down to the player to fuel their own fun. I do admit this is most likely the way an actual zombie apocalypse would feel, but it loses you with being too realistic sometimes. You get hungry, tired, bored, stressed, sick, which are really good aspects of the game and gives you a real sense of struggle when trying to survive, but this does sacrifice some of your own fun. Next up is the skill system. The base game does provide core mechanics which translate to real life, but leave out some quality of life aspects in other areas. This is kind of a staple for the game, where it smashes it out the park in some areas, but other areas are so untouched that it just feels like they're in the game for the sake of being there. It's cool and interesting that you do have to grind some skills as you would have to in real life if you wanted to progress your learning and understanding of that skill. For example, carpentry. For someone who has no idea how to use a hammer and nails would have to use trial and error, creating sketchy and ugly looking builds, slowly progressing and improving your building skills into larger scale items, like the double hinge doors. It gives players incentives to grind. It makes entire sense. However, if one skill has so much incentive, that needs to go across the entire board for it to make sense. If we compare this skill to electrical, for example, you ideally need to grind this to level 1, and that's it. Once you get to level 1, you can hotwire cars, and it feels like anything you gain from grinding any further was just an afterthought by developers, which is not really important to the gameplay or progression, leading players, i.e. me, to grind it for 1 or 2 in-game days and then never again. There is another video which explains this in much more detail, and I'll link it in the description. He is the Project Zomboid GOAT, so go watch it, but at least after this video. Next up is the mods. The game relies too heavily on the modding community to make the game fun or just work in some circumstances. It could be as simple as the light a cigarette on a stove mod, something which is such a simple concept but it makes the game feel more playable and realistic. As I said in the beginning, if you're trying to make it realistic, these things need to be included, but it just feels that Zomboid has got to a point where the player base kind of overlooks the base game and installs a bunch of mods right away. I haven't got the first clue about coding and mods, but if I was a developer, I'd be reaching out to some of these modders and offering them jobs. They clearly know more about what the player wants, rather than just working towards other updates which no one asked for. Base building. I actually think it's pretty good and it's realistic. There isn't a lot I could fault about it, to be honest. The fact that planks weigh a ton is realistic and you can only carry a few before hitting max capacity. Unless I'm Kratos from God of War, I'm not going to be able to carry 32 by 4s just in my backpack alone. The multiple trips and the resource gathering gives you a real sense of accomplishment when you finally finish your build. You need to have the right tools to do certain things, like a crowbar to collect windows, a screwdriver to disassemble lights and fixtures to bring back to your base. The only thing I can think of which would make this any better is some sort of blueprint building. If you could lay out your idea for your base and the game could tell you how much material you need for it in total. No one just builds one singular wall in the middle of nowhere, and I would imagine in real life you would stockpile items until you can build what you want. The mechanic could be simple, lay out 10 walls, a set of stairs and flooring, and it's all tallied up in the corner to a total of 68 planks and 120 nails, for example. That would be a nice touch, but it's not exactly needed. Now this one's a big topic. NPCs. Now I know this has been a topic in the Zomboid community for years, but it's so crucial. It could break the loneliness of Knox County, giving a sense of community, potentially trading outposts, things you can interact with other than zombies. Even a fetch quest every now and then would elevate the game massively. I'm not saying we need in-depth characters with backstories and voice actors and lore, but some scripted dialogue with another entity which isn't dead would be great. This could include some rarer items only available through NPCs and leaving it down to the player to either abandon the NPC and keep the items for themselves, or be a good hero we all pretend to be. It would be a realistic feature which fits with the style and dynamic of the game already, but this is a rabbit hole topic, so I'll leave this here. Developers, we need some sort of NPCs in the game. And finally, milestones. Now, I haven't seen anyone else discuss this, but I think this is the biggest downfall of Zomboid. In short, the milestones in Project Zomboid are way too easy, and this leads to a huge problem. And by the way, the reason I'm calling them milestones is because they're not plot points. You could play the game without ever completing them if you really wanted to. The main milestones in the core game is setting up a generator and a water source. I have posted a video on my channel, which I'll link at the end, which shows you how, with a bit of luck, you can both achieve these on day one. This isn't necessarily a problem, but when you have a sandbox game, you need milestones and achievements to give players incentives to complete and progress. However, I'm a strong believer that you need incentives not to complete these milestones as quick as possible. Come again? What? Why? As you look at the screen confused by that comment. Let me explain by comparing this to another sandbox survival game, the all-time GOAT, Minecraft. When you boil Minecraft down to its bare bones, the milestones are the Ender Dragon fight and then to collect the Elytra, if you class this as a core milestone. Yes, there are various other aspects of the game which you could class as milestones, but these are the ones that I believe are core. So why would you want to put these milestones off? Maybe you want to build a huge house, dive into a cave to get resources for the best gear, grind some levels to get the best enchantments, take some time to get potions, trade with villagers, build some farms, etc. The bottom line is, none of that is required to take on the Ender Dragon. These are what I call PFF, player fueled fun. Objectives that aren't necessarily required to progress but are in the game so the player can go on a tangent and feel a small sense of accomplishment by diving into that aspect of the game, which will help you prepare or even overpower the player before taking on the dragon. If you disagree and think these are milestones, just look up on YouTube Minecraft speedruns. People are completing the game in under 15 minutes without even touching any of these aspects. I know I'm waffling a bit, but let's circle this back to Project Zomboid. You don't need a generator right away, but then you would just live in the dark ages with no power. Walking around in the dark, not able to store fresh food for long term, no use of your TV or radio to listen to tapes and DVDs which you've stockpiled. This prevents progression, and this is no way an incentive. The same with the water source. You could leave pots and pans outside and wait for it to rain, continually boiling water and storing it on a daily basis. Or you have to go from house to house drinking a finite water source, which just becomes more inconvenient with time. Why would you want to play a game where you are making it more difficult for yourself out of spite, when you could easily complete a milestone which increases the quality of life and efficiency? This is a bit long-winded, but the ultimate point is, if you have no incentives to push back milestones, players will complete them as soon as possible, to automate a process or make their lives easier. But then this leads to having only player-fueled fun after milestones. The huge problem with this is, the game comes to an end when you lose interest, or you die from doing a silly task you thought of because there's nothing else in the game to do or work towards. You need to have player-fueled fun and incentives to push back completion of milestones, or make them harder to complete, forcing the players to dive into a different aspect of the game in the meantime, before taking on the final milestone. Again, it's a double-edged sword. It's realistic. In an apocalypse, you would want to get these things in place as soon as possible to increase your chances of long-term survival. So it's not all doom and gloom, and I'm not just going to sit here and moan about the game, but I'm going to give you my views on how I think the game could be improved massively. For the milestones, I would change the dynamic of them completely. For the generator, make it harder to obtain. Yes, the current game, you can decrease the spawn rate of it, making it harder to find, but I would make it a craftable object you need to scavenge for. Potentially grind some of these neglected skills to be able to craft. Why not make it so some parts only spawn in certain places in the map? Or again, chuck in an NPC with a fetch quest or a blueprint you need to collect before you can build it, pushing the players to travel, explore and loot, rather than finding it on day one and becoming a hermit for the rest of the game. For the water source, I wouldn't change the current way of obtaining it, but why not incorporate a weather system involving the Nox virus? Why not have the emergency channel on the radio explain the areas of clouds which are polluted with the Nox virus, meaning the water is completely unpurifiable? The player would then have to travel and set up multiple different bases so they could obtain drinkable water at different times of the in-game year. Or even add a computer only found in a military base or an underground lab, which shows a visual representation of the weather shifts. The game needs some NPCs. They don't need to be complex, just in-depth enough that the player can interact with them and decide whether to screw that person over and take those items for themselves, or become the hero of Nox County. If the Project Zomboid developers wanted to lean so heavily into the realism, it's realistic that some other people would survive. With no interaction with anything but the dead, your existence becomes futile. There's nothing to do, there's nothing to drive for, there's nothing to progress to. You are just trying to stay alive. Reach out to the modding community and incorporate some systems and dynamics that people have created which players use so often. I haven't got the first clue about coding or data protection, but get these guys on the payroll. They know what players want and they are doing it for free, just because they love your game and they want to elevate the gaming experience. And my final point, which is slightly controversial, there needs to be a way you can escape Knox County, even if that's just to get to a different location to survive. Maybe the chopper comes back one day and the player needs to figure out where it's going to land and at what time. Or maybe the player finds a boat shipwrecked and they need to repair it to travel along the river to a different location. I understand it kind of defeats the original object of the game in trying to survive as long as possible, but compare that to Call of Duty Zombies. It's gone from surviving as many rounds as possible to incorporating Easter eggs and way to actually finish the level. We're humans at the end of the day, and we like to complete stuff. And when you're surviving with no end date or no end goal, game gets boring. At the end of the day, I'm just some random guy on the internet with an opinion. You can either agree with me or disagree with me. The reason I wanted to make this video is to highlight why the game is so good. It's so realistic, but it just misses the mark on some aspects. And the game could just be so much better if they incorporate some small features. If you did enjoy this video, please let me know down below. Like, sub and flick on that notification bell just so you get told every time I post. And make sure you take it easy out there. Peace.